Hi, I'm Dr. Poloji. I wrote a book called Stop Lying, Getting Unlost and Unstuck in Your Life, and it was about unconscious lies and how the persistence of those gets us stuck in our lives, unable to make change even with a therapist's help, and how identifying the lies all by itself is the thing that can lead to all the changes that we seek. I'd like to talk today about something else, which I don't usually talk about, and that's conscious lies. Lies we are aware of if we're honest with ourselves. They're kind of automatic, but they're conscious. And they're very destructive. Now, it used to be that our leaders helped us with this. No more. I'm fired up about this because on the way to work today, I was listening to the news and I heard about Roy Moore losing the election in Alabama, and I heard, that was a second thought. The first thought was the attack, the terrorist attack by this lone kid in New York City in the 42nd Street bus station. Tried to blow himself up and take people with him. And Trump said, this is why we need immigration reform, so that we properly vet people so that we don't let bad guys in. Mayor de Blasio, mayor of New York's response was, this is Trump again bringing in racist issues or making racist comments and saying that because of this one misguided, sick individual committing this reprehensible act, and these are the mayor's words, not mine. Because of all that, we have to, all immigrants are evil. That's what de Blasio said Trump was saying. Now, Trump didn't say that. Before anybody asks, I didn't vote for Trump. But that's not what Trump said. Trump said we need to vet people better because of these kinds of bing-bongs who cause such damage. That's a hard thing to argue with. But if you phrase it the way de Blasio did, then you can knock down Trump. So, de Blasio is not telling the truth. There's a real discussion to be had about immigration, but the leaders aren't having it. To get back to what I started to say before, when I went off on the wrong track, Trump, talking about the election, said, Trump supported Roy Moore, I understand, but then he said, I knew he wouldn't win. This is what Trump does, of course. No different than a child who trips in school, and the kids laugh at him, and he goes, I did it on purpose. We've seen him do this 100 times. So our leaders are not telling the truth. They're not helping us identify the data and talk about it. And therefore, there isn't any real discussion about immigration, Middle East peace, global trade, racism, of course. None of these issues are being discussed in any substantive way. Instead, we have people screaming at each other. And it happens at all levels of society. You go to a party and those topics come up. Do you actually hear people discussing and moving towards any kind of resolution? Mostly what you seem to hear is people shouting these slogans. For example, just to make a really obvious one, the abortion debate. All that you really ever hear is, I'm pro-life, I'm pro-choice. I believe women should have control over their bodies. I believe babies, even unborn, have a right to life. Well, if you phrase it in those ways, I believe with all four of those statements. Women have a right to their control of their bodies. Babies have a right to live, even unborn ones. And I certainly am both pro-life and pro-choice. How could one be opposed to those things? If you want to have a discussion, make the data real. For example, 35-year-old married executive gets accidentally pregnant, wants to abort the child. Does she have that right? And if so, how late in the pregnancy does she have that right? That's a tricky question. 15-year-old kid gets raped by her drunken uncle. Does she have a right to abort? And if so, up to what point in the pregnancy? These are hard questions. And it's, of course, easier to shout slogans at each other, to retreat into an abstraction. No woman should have anybody tell her what to do. Well, who could argue with that? No person should have anybody tell them what to do, unless they're underage and not in control of themselves yet. See, even there's exceptions. Let's look at real data. It's hard to do, but that's what makes us wonderful. That's what makes us human. When a dog has a rash, you can't tell it not to scratch, that even though the scratching feels better, it's going to make it worse, because they can't reason that way. You have to put a cone on their head so they don't scratch it. Well, unfortunately, us humans are living a little bit like that when it comes to the more complex issues. And I really believe that data, the truth, resolves it. And catching a lie, catching when you're not facing the truth, is the necessary, absolutely necessary first step to making any kind of movement in your life, any kind of change. But also, it's often the only thing you need to do, and that's all over my book, which is available at Amazon.com. Little plug. If you can catch where you're simply not looking at real facts, real truth, as soon as you do that, you're starting to move. And if you don't do that, then you're locked into one of those social gatherings we've all had, where there's just homilies being shouted back and forth, and nothing moves. And if you listen to the homilies, they all sound reasonable. Pro-life, pro-choice. Let me pause this for a quick moment. Can't find the pause button. Where was I going? I'm going to ask you to hold on for a second while I look at my notes. Oh yes, I know what I wanted to say. Just as an example, for hundreds and hundreds of years, Isaac Newton, had a system of equations that explain the movement of objects in space, planets, rocks colliding into each other. And it worked, it made sense, and it was very intuitive. It seemed right, it made sense, it felt right. Just like saying women should have a right to control their bodies, it feels right. The problem is that Einstein came along and said, this doesn't explain all the data. And Einstein's equations and Einstein's theory were completely counterintuitive. It said such nutty things as when an object goes faster, its mass changes, its weight changes, its size changes, its the rate of time passing inside a spaceship orbiting the Earth is different than the rate of time passing down here on the surface of Earth. All these crazy things that make no sense. How do we resolve it? Well, you don't resolve it by screaming, this doesn't make sense at each other. What happens is you look at the data, and it turns out that the orbit of Mercury, the planet closest to the Sun, is most affected by gravity, which is one of the things that Einstein says affects these changes. And lo and behold, Newton's equations don't predict where Mercury's orbit, where Mercury will be at any given point in time. Einstein's equations do. If you use Newton's equations and you say, that's where Mercury should be, it isn't there. If you use Einstein's equations, it says Mercury's supposed to be there, and there it is. So there's nothing to argue about. It used to be, when I was a kid, that there was some sense, this is just about before the Kennedy assassination, and before Vietnam, there was still some sense that you looked towards authorities and leaders for some clarity of thought. For someone to tell you, if you scratch that itch, I know it'll feel better, but you're making it worse. We don't have that anymore. Now our leaders are acting like children too. So we have to, because the only power we have is our vote. And I'm not encouraging you to vote for Trump or vote for Hillary. I don't know who you should vote for. I certainly don't know what the solution to such complex problems as abortion, immigration rights, racial, institutional racism, global trade, tax reform. I don't know the answer to those. Those are hard issues, but I do know that if we don't look at the data, if we don't stop lying to ourselves, we won't get anywhere. How long has the Mideast peace process been going on? So let's be human. Let's be all we can be. Oy. Thank you.